Hi, welcome everyone. So hopefully you're in the right place. I know there's a little issue with the signs out front. This is me. I've been around for a long time. Co-founder of DrupalEasy.com. And rather than me telling you about me, I always like to ask ChatGPT. So I typed this in this morning. So there, that's. See if you can figure out where ChatGPT went wrong about me.
Is it being a respected educator?
Yeah. I don't think I've ever. I mean, sure, I go to the beach and stuff. I don't know where that came from. I mean, I paddleboard. I'm lucky enough, I live in Florida, and I live in a place where I go paddleboarding regularly, so I don't know if somehow it saw that and translated that into open water swimming, but that was something.
That's a lesser known fact.
Yeah, I don't even know it. That's how. All right, so, yeah. So real quick, what I'm going to present today is just a very small slice of a bigger course that I teach called Professional Module Development. It's 15 weeks, 2 half days a week, 90 hours of instruction. You can read the rest up here. I'm actually in the middle of the semester right now. The next one starts in August. If you want to learn more about that, or if you have any questions, I've got some handouts I can give you, or you can talk to me anytime this week. But yeah, that's that. All right, so what are we going to do? Today is more of a demo than an instruction. But I will give you everything you need to reproduce what you're going to see. So at the end of these slides, there'll be a URL and a QR code where you can get these slides, because these slides have other links to code snippets and configuration on GitHub snippets that you can just use. So we are going to focus today on kind of what's a best practice, good foundation for using Visual Studio Code with Drupal development, with an emphasis on easy access to our tools, our coding standards tools, PhpStan, which is a static analysis tool, Xdebug, and which one am I missing? Oh, unit tests, running unit tests. In addition, there's a few other extensions that I recommend that just kind of allow us to work faster and more efficiently. So this is the list of extensions that I always recommend as a good starting point. On my machine, I've got a few others for like to-do lists and like the twig extension to provide syntax highlighting and stuff. But really, the thing that unlocks most of what I'm going to show you today is this Remote Explorer and Dev containers. This allows us to connect Visual Studio Code directly to our DDEV web container. So we're not looking on my machine. I have a Mac. So when I open up VS Code and connect to a project, I'm not looking at the files in the Mac OS file system. VS Code is looking at the files directly in the web container. And that's the key. That's what unlocks all this rich integration between our tools and Visual Studio Code's UI. I'll just run down this list real quick. So other extensions that we're going to utilize today are PHP Sniffer and Beautifier, which is kind of the integration with PHPCS, which our community's coding standards. Doc Blocker, which it's kind of like a text expander. It allows us to write documentation within our code for methods and classes and stuff like that. PhpStan, integration with PhpStan, obviously. Drupal Smart Snippets, which is this is the thing that there is no equivalent in PHP Storm. I'll talk about that. PHP IntelliFence, which is the thing that indexes all of the PHP, and this kind of provides 80% of what PHP Storm provides out of the box when it comes to like code navigation and quick access to one class's base class or something like that. A lot of autocomplete. When you type a class name, you do a little arrow, it shows you the drop down of all the available methods. All that's provided from PHP IntelliFence. PHPDebug, which is our Xdebug integration, and PHPUnit Test Explorer, which allows us to run unit tests right from Visual Studio Code's UI. So it's not that I'm against the command line. I'm just not as fast on the command line as some folks, so I like to have everything in the UI where it's just there and easy for me. I mean, kind of my pet peeve is, if I don't see a developer using settings.local.php in their local environment, I'm like, what are you doing? Because I feel like you're working with one arm tied behind your back. All right, prerequisites. So obviously, DDEV and Visual Studio Code. If you want to duplicate what I'm doing, a Drupal 10 site up and running, you're going to need the Drupal core dev dependencies. Why? Because this is PHPCS, PHPStan, PHPUnit. So all these tools that we use as module and theme developers, are part of the Drupal core dev dependencies. For some of the stuff, you're going to want comfort with the command line, not too much so. A basic understanding of what a coding standard is. Right? In our community, when you write PHP code, indentations are 2 spaces. Not one tab that's a 2-space width, not 4 spaces, but 2 spaces. And that's a very simple example of a coding standard. And then some knowledge of using Xdebug, just understanding like what is real-time line-by-line debugging. So, what I'm going to show you is just a baseline. This stuff, you might want to tweak this depending on your own personal preferences. This stuff evolves over time as tools evolve and new extensions get written or new coding standards come out. So this is, a good place to start. So this is not the be-all and end-all. I probably update, my documentation for this stuff, a couple times a year. So don't, if you're watching this recording in 2026, something's probably changed. All right, so starting point. Same list of things. And again, so we're really going to focus on this remote explore and dev containers. I will mention there is another extension called DDEV Manager. I forget the name of the organization that wrote it, but it's an extension for Visual Studio Code. It's actually really good if you're not using remote explorer and dev containers. The DDEV, I'm going to mention it because it is really good. The DDEV Manager extension basically gives you access to everything DDEV can do from the Visual Studio Code UI. So if you want to add like a Solar container, there's a DDEV get command that will give you a Solar container, type, wait a couple minutes or a minute, and boom, you've got a DDEV Solar container up and running. The DDEV Manager extension, it's just right from the UI. You can just select which container or which thing you want to get, and it will add it. So it's really good for for those of you who aren't as comfortable on the command line. All right. So I know I talk fast. Like I said, I'm used to giving it like 45 minutes, so I'll take a breather here for a sec. All right. So how does this work? Because if we're going to have Visual Studio Code talk directly to the web container, our first stop can't be Visual Studio Code. Like we need that web container up and running first before VS Code can connect to it. So normally what I do, and the only thing I have running on my machine right now is, other than a web browser and stuff, I don't have a project running at all. I have a project set up. And apologies to mid-camp, but this is from Florida Drupal camp. But I'm going to just come to my terminal and do a DDEV start. And I can't do this from within VS Code because I want to connect to this web container that is just now starting up. So this is really the only command I need to run from the terminal to get our container up and running. And now I can fire up Visual Studio Code, and I will make this bigger as we need it. Rearrange things real quick. All right, so, there we go. So the idea is that we want to connect VS Code directly to our web container. And the best analogy I have is the matrix, right? When you jack into the matrix, the world you're in, the dirty, dark world that they live in with their spatial, I don't even know if they're really called spatials, whatever they are, that kind of goes away, and then you're in the matrix. That's the analogy for Visual Studio Code. When we connect Visual Studio Code directly to the web container, Visual Studio Code no longer really knows about, in my case, Mac OS, or Windows, or your host operating system. Because its frame of reference is now relative to that web container. Which is really, like I said, it's the key to unlock everything. So instead of knowing Kung Fu, now it knows how to call the tools inside of the container. It knows how to call PHPUnit. It knows how to call PHPCS. So if we didn't have this, if we're in our project and we want to run PHPCS, we'd have to do either a DDEV SSH to bring us inside the container, which we are there, and then we have access to the PHPCS right there. Or we'd have to go DDEV dot, which is equivalent of DDEV execute, PHP, and I'll just do another which PHPCS. Right, so from Mac OS, if we want to run PHPCS, we have to basically tell DDEV to run it for us. But we can't configure VS Code to do this. We can't say, hey, VS Code, run PHPCS, but before you run PHPCS, do a DDEV dot. Like, the extensions don't work that way. So we need to bypass Mac OS and jack directly in. And the way we do that is through the Remote Explorer extension in VS Code. So what does Remote Explorer do? Well, just Remote Explorer allows you to connect VS Code to a remote machine via tunnel or via SSH. That's just Remote Explorer. If you add the dev containers extension, and by the way, this is the most confusing part of the whole presentation, right? Because basically we need to tell VS Code how to connect to our container, hence the dev containers extension. So when we select dev containers, which is already selected, you can see the Visual Studio Code, or rather the extension, is saying, hey, here are the Docker containers I see running on your machine right now. Well, the ones that are running are the ones with a play button, and then it sees these as well. But this allows us, it's kind of like we're making a remote connection. It's not really remote because it's on the same machine, but it's kind of a remote connection, but we're talking to a different file system. So in our case, we want to talk to the DDEV web container. You can do the exact same thing if you're using Lambda. And I'm showing DDEV here because there's fewer steps in some of the stuff I'm going to show you, but if you're using Lambda, you'll see your Lambda container here. Exactly the same.
So would the Lambda container be the app server?
Yes, the app server. Okay. Where this is the web container in DDEV, there's the app container in Lambda. Exactly. So now we're basically going to connect to that web container. Before I do that, though, I do want to, let me just open up sites. All right, so notice when I'm on Mac OS, I'm looking at this folder in Mac OS, right? So that's the same, that's equivalent of this. VS Code just shows everything as uppercase or something. When I connect to the web container, it'll take a second, but notice, make this a bit wider. Yeah, it's long. So HTML, that is the name of the directory. So inside of the web container, if you're using DDEV, the project root is always at var/www/html. That's this HTML. And the extension, basically gives you an excruciating detail. It's like hammering you on the head. Hey, I'm connected to a Docker container here. It even goes so far as to say, which this is Rancher Desktop over here. That's what I use instead of Docker for Mac. But now, Visual Studio Code, it doesn't know anything about the Mac OS file system now. It's looking directly at the container. And if it's looking at the container, I don't have to worry about typing this DDEV dot stuff to run commands, because as far as Visual Studio is concerned, it's inside the container. So to run my tools, I just have to do, I just have to call them. So,
Michael?
yes.
When you connect, what user are you inside the container? Are you?
I don't know the answer. I assume you're the default. I don't know the answer to that, actually. Yeah. Let me put it this way. It's never been an issue not getting access to what I need.
Type in who am I and find out.
That's true, yeah. Thank you, Marky.
You know.
I thought you were going to sleep through this. Now you're like,
You're very interesting sometimes.
sometimes. There, I'm me. I don't know how, let's see, is it the same here?
Who owns the files in there? Is Michael the owner of everything?
I am.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
I suppose there is a volume attached to the container. Would it matter? Would it still see it?
There's a well, in this case, the file system is synced between Mac OS and the container. The only volume that DDEV does by default is for the database, the database. So if I was to disconnect the sync, if I was to stop the syncing, the Docker syncing, then I would need a volume for my code base. Otherwise, that would disappear every time I did a DDEV stop. Right? Okay. All right, so one note, we're going to go through the extensions in a minute. But there are a bunch of these extensions, PHPDebug being one of them, is that when you open up a new container for the first time, those extensions need to be installed inside the container as well. Some of the extensions can act globally. Drupal Smart Snippets is one of them that doesn't need to be installed in the container, but some of them do need to be installed in the container. And you'll see a little blue button. I don't always get this depending on how often I do this demo, but we'll see right now. So, inside the container, let me make some room here. I'll make this bigger over here. So if we go to our extensions, so before we actually dive in, notice we've got, zoom in, 3 sections, local installed. So these are the ones that are kind of installed in Visual Studio Code globally. So these work in Mac OS, I'm looking at a Mac OS file system or DDEV. And then these are the extensions that are installed inside of the container. And normally, the first time through, just install everything globally the way you install any other VS Code extension. And then the first time you open a container, you might have to come in here and let's see if I have any that are, I don't have any that are marked with that other blue button. Doc blocker, for some reason, almost every time you have to click that and reload it for some reason. I don't know what the reason for that is. But yeah, so you can see I do have GitHub Copilot turned off because sometimes it's annoying. But PHP, so Xdebug, Doc blocker, IntelliFence, Sniffer and Beautifier, PHPStan, PHPUnit Test Explorer. So those are all ones that have to be installed inside the container. And then the other ones, really, that's pretty much it. So, so Remote Explorer and Dev Containers, those are the 2 I mentioned. There's actually, if you go to the marketplace for Visual Studio Code, there's actually a bundle. It's all free. There's a bundle where you get this one, this one, this one, and that one in one download. So that's why I have all 4. Drupal Smart Snippets is really cool. I'll show you a demo of that in a minute. One thing it does. Well, like I said, I like to-do lists, and I think there's a Twig one down there as well. There's probably a couple others down there. Yeah, Twig. Oh, there's the button right there. Right. So, Twig language 2. It's not available in the container unless I hit this little button. And you see it's installing. I should need that. And now it is available in the container. So, just that easy to do that. Okay, any questions? So far, so good? Yeah.
your Git workflow, are you running Git inside of the container or outside?
Yeah, DDEV and I believe Lando both come with Git inside the container. I'll be honest, I think Git, for me, in my experience, it's slower in the container than outside the container. So I generally just do all that through the terminal. But you can do it all through VS Code.
Terminal, like on your host operating system?
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, there are definitely people who like to use a Git extension of VS Code. That works. I mean, nothing's stopping that from working.
But both are available.
They're both available. Yeah, exactly. All right. So in order for all of this stuff to work, these extensions, we got to configure some of them. So I do want to mention, depending on how comfortable you are with VS Code, you may or may not be aware that there's 2 levels of user settings. There's the user settings, which are kind of the global VS Code. They're valid for all projects you open up with VS Code. And then there's the per project settings, which are called workspace settings. And I'm going to give you examples of both that you can download and use with your own starting point, or merge my settings with your settings, and you'll see why in a moment. But generally what I do is I have stuff in my user settings that's a lot of coding standard stuff, so that VS Code automatically adheres to Drupal coding standards as much as possible. And then fallback configuration. Because in our workspace settings, this is where I have things that are specific to how should VS Code run PHPCS? How should it run PHPStan? How should it run PHP to do just basic PHP linting? So in order to access these settings, you can absolutely, do the normal, command comma. I actually find it much easier. VS Code has I always forget what it's called, and I always forget, command palette. There it is, under View, command palette. So it's Command-Shift-P on a Mac. Command-Shift-P, it opens up this thing. And this basically, it's not a search of the code. It's basically a search of all the Visual Studio Code functionality, menu systems, all that stuff. So I actually find this a lot easier a lot of the time. So if you just start typing settings, and you can see it sorts by most recently used. So you see my top 2, right? Workspace settings and user settings. So the second one down is the global. The one that's currently highlighted is the per project. So if we open up, before we do that, I don't want to talk ahead of my slides. As promised, what I'm about to show you, you can, this is a GitHub snippet, I believe. And all of these links will be in the last slide. I'll leave that last slide up so you can get all this stuff. But you get a copy of my user settings there, and I also have a copy of my workspace settings there. And which one is? So I just opened my user settings. So let's just kind of, again, I'm not going to go line by line through this because that would be really boring. But I will kind of just go section by section. This first section is all about coding standard stuff. And then file association, so the VS Code knows to treat a .cm file as a PHP file. And then a couple sections here to exclude files from indexing and extensions. And this basically makes it so VS Code isn't doing so much stuff in the background. We've got another section here, which is kind of, again, coding standard stuff, and end of file stuff, new line stuff. And then I kind of wrote these so that the rest of these go section by section for different extensions. So this is like PHP linting. You can see my default PHP path, the executable, this is Mac OS. It's a homebrew path. Notice it's grayed out. It's grayed out because my workspace settings are overriding this. So this is just a fallback for me. So I've got some doc blocker settings, IntelliFence settings. And again, this is all stuff that is it's set up to adhere to Drupal coding standards as much as possible. Smart snippet, and then this stuff down here is just the font size because I'm presenting and stuff like that. So this, I don't even think this is going to download. So user settings, just kind of good basic user settings. Now, I will say there is a page, I mentioned it somewhere in the slides, there is a page on Drupal.org for configuring Visual Studio Code for Drupal development. It's pretty good. I'm going to give it like a B plus. I've actually made some updates to it based on what I'm showing up here, but I feel like some of my stuff goes a little bit too far into the opinion side of things. So some of what you see up here is not on that page. But that page is also a really good place to start. That page has a lot more extensions and a lot more if this or that than what I recommend. But that's a good place to start as well. So I do want to mention that. All right, so that was the global settings. Now the workspace settings, much shorter, and let's spend a couple minutes here. So this is I'm overriding this same setting that was in the global settings. And notice the path is different. Before, the path in Mac OS is like a homebrew path. This path, where does that come from? Well, if I'm inside of my DDEV container, as I am here, where's the PHP executable? It's at user bin PHP. User bin PHP. Where's the executable of PHPCS? www or var www.html vendor bin PHPCS. So because we're jacked into the container now, we can use the paths inside the container. Now, it would be great if this all worked. If I didn't need to, I don't know if it would be great, but if it didn't, if we weren't able to connect directly to the container, these paths would have to look something like, well, they wouldn't really be paths. They'd be commands. It'd have to be ddev.phpcs. And that's not a path, that's a command. So the fact that we can connect directly to the container, and that's the file system that VS Code is seeing, that's why we can configure this extension to run the proper version of PHPCS, phpcbf. It can use our PHPCS coding standards. It can call PHPStan directly. It can use our PHPStan configuration, which is in the .env file. Yeah.
In your experience of maybe showing people this, have these paths changed much between different people's locals?
No, if you're using DDEV, unless you're doing something wacky with DDEV, these are the paths. If you're using Lando, the only difference in this file, replace var www.html with app. Right? The default project path in DDEV is this. The default project path in Lando is that. Search and replace. I mean, it's like 6 or 7 lines there. All right. Yeah, so let's see this stuff in action, right? So you get all that stuff configured. And by the way, here's something else in PHP. I'm in VS Code. Developer reload window. When something's going wonky in Drupal and we're working on our local, what do we do? What's the first thing we do? Rebuild caches, right? This is the equivalent in VS Code. If you've changed configuration recently, or if you've installed an extension and something's not right and you're not sure what, this is like VS Code rebuild caches. It basically just kind of resets itself, and not that I needed to do it there, but I did want to mention it. So what does all this get you? So I've got this is a formatter plugin and a base class there from the serial contrib module, which I've been in a conversation with, we'll say. So I'm going to open up my command line, and I'm going to go to the problems tab. So why should you do everything I just showed you? Because you don't have to run PHPStan on the command line to get your report. You don't need to run PHPCS from the command line to get your report. There's a PHPStan issue in this file that's showing up in the problems tab. And it's telling, we know it's from PHPStan, and all the information is there. We can go to line 60 and and even it's giving, I don't know about you guys, but these red squigglies are like the red bubbles on my iPhone. Like I can't have red bubbles on my iPhone. I need to clear all that out. Same thing with these red squigglies. If we have PHPCS issues, let's just make something. And you see how fast that happened. So there's a PHPCS issue. This stuff, having it available here, having these red squigglies here, if you're the type of person who likes to solve problems and wants to learn, this will just nudge you and poke you into being a better developer, right? Like, why is that red squiggle there? I want to fix it. And your tools will bully you and train you into being a better developer. I really like one thing. How many people use PhpStan on a regular basis? All right, you all should be using PhpStan on a regular basis because it will make you a better PHP developer. And the great thing about it is, where with PHPCS, you just say PHPCS check my file, and it will give you here's all the stuff you need to fix. PhpStan is a little more gentle. There's 10 levels, 0 through 9. Start on level 0. And it'll show you the stuff that's really wrong. And you'll very quickly learn how to not make those mistakes. And then, I guarantee if you do PHP development every day or a couple hours a day, within a week or two, you won't be making any level 0 mistakes anymore. Then you nudge it up to level 1. Then you nudge it up to level 2. And it's actually really easy to do that nudge. I'll show you real quick. There you go. I work on level 5 generally, and here's something that's going to make you feel really good. Anybody know where Drupal core is at as far as PhpStan is concerned? We're fighting for level 1 right now. Yeah. Well, actually, no, I think we may have achieved level 1, and we might be fighting for level 2 right now. And it's not that there's bugs in it, it's just that PhpStan is a lot of PhpStan is about getting a lot more specific with types. PHP is loosely typed. PhpStan says, okay, you can be loosely typed, but at least tell me what type this thing should be, right? And that's a lot of what PhpStan is, and that actually, when you can write PHP in a more strongly typed way, that allows your tool to give you more information. That allows your autocompletes for your method names and stuff to be more accurate. That allows you to write PHP code in a way that's going to lead to fewer bugs. So having these tools, and that's one of the things I really love about having these tools in VS Code set up like this is it's always there. This freaking bubble, it's like mocking me all the time. It's like, dude, 12? You suck, Mike, get on the job, So I think it's really good. Right? Anybody who really wants to improve their skills in PHP. All right, so we talked about that. So that's PhpStan, PHPCS, Drupal Smart Snippets. So this has a lot of autocomplete stuff. It adds a lot of autocomplete stuff that's specific to Drupal. So I'll show you a couple things. And the first thing I'm going to show you, yes, this is something you can get in PHP Storm. Let's see, I gotta make this bigger so I can see what I'm looking at. Look for my .module file. There it is. So we can do serial underscore. I don't want service. I gotta get past all this stuff. Actually, no. I'm sorry. I always get since I use both. I have to. There we go. So autocomplete for all the hooks. Now this is not a dynamic list. It's not dynamic, meaning if you have a contributed module to your project, it's not going to show you hooks from that contributed module. It's a static list for Drupal core hooks. That's just the way Drupal Smart Snippets work, so that's a little buyer beware. But at least you don't have to run to api.drupal.org to find the hook or the arguments going in, and it kind of it scaffolds it for you nicely. So that's one thing it does. The other thing it does, if you are in a .module file or a preprocessor hook in a .theme file, and you need access to a Drupal service in a way that does not depend on dependency injection or does not require dependency injection, you can do @service. And Drupal Smart Snippets gives you a list. Again, it's static, so if you have a contributed module that provides a service, you won't see that in this list. But here are all the Drupal core services, and you click one, and it does a nice job because it gives you, the doc block, it gives you your type hint, and it calls the static service class and loads that service. So that's nice as well. And I don't think that this is available in PHP Storm, but that's nice, but that's not in my opinion, the big deal thing with Drupal Smart Snippets. The big deal thing, so we're going to go into review elements here. Oh no, I actually want well, I can do it here, it doesn't really matter. So, how many people were around in, let's say, legacy Drupal days, Drupal 7 and before days, when you had to write form API? Remember that page on Drupal.org that showed you all the form API elements in a table? And in your browser you saw this much, but the table actually went like this. You have it way over here. But it was actually useful. It was sizing, it was ugly, but it said, okay, well, I need this type of element. What are the, what properties? Like, that was helpful. In modern Drupal, there's not really a page like that anymore. And it's kind of a pain to find, I need an image button element. Like, what are the properties that I actually need to implement to get this? This is where Drupal Smart Snippet shines. This is something that I haven't been able to figure out how to do in PHP Storm, but you can just do at form, and oh my gosh, they're all right there. What I said, image button, and boom, it just gives it. I mean, this alone, this is why we should. I don't think Andy Bloom is here at MidCamp, but if you see Andy Bloom, you should buy him a meal because of this, because I guarantee it'll save you a few minutes. Yeah. And he's a very good maintainer of it. It stays up to date. Again, it's statically, every time there's a new release of Drupal core, he's got this little magic script he runs that updates the module with all of the form elements. And it's not just form elements. It's, for you front-end developers out there, there's render elements, and it just gives you, doesn't give you all the properties because that'd be overkill. It gives you the ones you probably need. And there's also element, all of those as well. So, yeah, Drupal Smart Snippets. I'm a big fan. IntelliFence. This is kind of table stakes, right? If you use PHP Storm, then you expect to be able to, if I'm in here, I'm like, does formatter base give me access to, config factory? I'm not sure. I'm holding down the command key, it becomes a link, or I can right click, go to definition. This is from PHP IntelliFence. Well, and boom, I'm in formatter base. So you don't have to go hunting for it, right? That's probably the thing I use most often, but it does stuff that you think is part of VS Code, but it's actually coming from IntelliFence. If we're inside of a class here, we can do this, like this autocomplete list. These are actually all methods that are available specifically to this class. And most of these are probably coming from formatter base in any of its parents. But because again, it's kind of table stakes, but that's what PHP IntelliFence brings to the table. And I will say, just beware, there are a couple. See if the internet is still Yeah, there's also Intellis. This is the one with Ben Newburn. This is the one I recommend. There's an IntelliSense, or there used to be IntelliSense one. I thought there was a PHP IntelliSense. Maybe I'm. Oh, there it is, right there. Yeah, this one's not as good, I don't think. No offense to Damien. But I've tried both of them. I really like IntelliFence. It is freemium. There's a paid version as well. I actually had the paid version for a while, but I looked one day and I wasn't using any of the paid features. I think in this case, he kind of overshot the mark because the free version is fantastic. So just make sure you grab the right one there. All right, PHP debug. Oh, look at that. See, this is what I'm talking about. Time flies when I'm going. All right. I'm not going to, oh, I guess I can do a quick demo of this. So it's actually pretty easy to do Xdebug in VS Code. Again, assuming you are using the PHP debug extension and configuring it in VS Code when you're jacked in to the container. You know what that means? It means you don't have to worry about path mappings. Path mappings are 90% of the time the reason why Xdebug isn't working for you. Is because your paths between the server and your local file system are not aligned. But when your server is your local file system, when we're jacked in, they're the same files. So you don't have to worry about path mapping. So it actually becomes a lot easier. So there is a link to this in the handout, in the slides, but you need a, let me see. Actually here, no, let me update this. So we'll go to here. I'll just show you where this goes. Yeah, this is all you need for your Xdebug configuration. So here, you know what? I'm just going to start from scratch here because it's only going to take a minute. Let me delete this. Delete permanently. All right, so when you want to use Xdebug, you have the extension installed. You come here and it basically says, you got to open a file. We're going to open up the index.php in a second, but we want to create a launch.json file. And this is basically us telling VS Code where's the debugging information coming from. So it's actually a pretty simple file. We're going to do PHP debugging, and it'll give you all of this stuff by default. And you're looking at this going, oh my gosh, and I've got a headache looking at it, but just delete all of it and replace it with what I give you. And that's the whole file right there. And it basically just says, every time Xdebug is, or there's a request, you launch the debugger, assuming that it's turned on. We'll see that in a minute. It's PHP. The debug information is coming from port 9003, which, if you're up to date on Lando or DDEV, that's the default port. Notice there's no path mappings. Normally we get path mapping entry right here from array. And then we've got some Xdebug settings, which I use, which I think are a pretty good place to start. But that's really all you need. So you do that. You open up your terminal, and this is another bit that is easier in DDEV than it is in Lando. But you can enable Xdebug when you're inside the container in DDEV with enable Xdebug. You can also do it from outside the container with DDEV Xdebug. I can't spell. Debug on. So DDEV gives you kind of both those little commands, but we enable Xdebug. So this is basically saying, this is telling the server, hey, send out that stream of debugging information. And then on the other side, we have to tell VS Code, hey, listen for that debugging information. And to listen, we hit start debugging. And in VS Code, the way I have mine configured, this will turn red. I've seen, if you're using, where did I just saw it at Drupal Camp, New Jersey, one of our students, it turned from black to blue when they were debugging, which I don't know what setting they had. There was some alternate color scheme, but that bottom bar should change colors. And the first time you do this, I recommend going into index.php. And then, do I even have a browser open? I do. So we'll come here and we'll do FLDC. So I'll just hit the site, and boom, I'm debugging. Yeah.
Does that work for CLI tools as well? Like if you're debugging a custom drush command?
Yep. Yep. Because path mappings, you don't have to worry about it.
You just
It's
turn
all-
on Xdebug in the container, and that's all the more it needs.
Yeah, when the server that's sending out the debugging is looking at the same files as your IDE, there's no path mapping.
Tests too, you can step debug.
Yes, custom drush commands, tests. If you really want to get in the weeds and you've got some dependencies somewhere deep in your vendor directory, it'll work. So, I want to be fair to PHP Storm because I do use it on a daily basis. The actual debugging I think is better in PHP Storm. I'll give you 2 reasons why. I use this debug console a lot. So this debug console down here lets you write PHP. It lets you write PHP and execute it as if you are at this point in your code scope. So I have access to like kernel down here. So I can do like, $ kernel, and it will show me, basically showing me the same thing that's up here. Right, but I can also do like, I don't know here what I can do really. You can do an echo 1 + 1. I know that's kind of silly. Oh, I guess I can't do that. Print?
You can do.
Yeah.
Print. Yeah, print. Okay, there we go. Well, okay. So I don't know why. But,
1 + 1 = 1.
yeah.
Thanks,
So,
PHP.
I know. That's not good. All right. So I guess there's 3 things that I like about PHP Storm because I think it'll get that right. In PHP Storm, this little line down here, you can expand and write multiple lines of code in PHP Storm. That's one thing I really like. I end up doing that all the time if I want to test the for each loop or something. The other thing that PHP Storm does that VS Code doesn't, I kind of alluded to it, but if I type kernel and do that, I want autocomplete. I want to see what's available. PHP Storm will show me an autocomplete in my debug console where VS Code doesn't. So when I'm really needing like hardcore debugging, I will switch over to PHP Storm for those 2 things. All right.
Is that the main thing that you would use PHP Storm for on a daily basis? You mentioned you switch back and forth.
Yeah,
Is that the main thing?
you know what it is? When I'm starting a new project, I'll think about which of the 2 tools I haven't used more lately, because I like to stay proficient in both. But if I happen to be in PHP Storm and I know I've got to do like a big form array or something, I'll switch over to VS Code for an afternoon just to get all the Drupal Smart Snippet stuff or vice versa.
But in VS Code, would there be a way to look at just the kernel methods and skip them?
Not in here. So what I normally do is, I come up here and I'll just put a temporary line of code in here. So the autocomplete works here, but I want it to work there. So.
One thing I like to do is move that control panel on the upper right-hand corner over the listen to Xdebug so that I know that I'm already in a session. I don't,
Yeah, that's actually not. So the thing about, and this is a problem, this is a mic problem for someone who uses both a lot. There in PHP Storm, there is a play button in the top bar that has nothing to do with Xdebug. It has to do with running tests. So my muscle memory, a lot of times when I want to, when you're done Xdebugging and you want the page to run out, you come up here and hit play. I will hit that play button in PHP Storm all the time. When I'm Xdebugging and suddenly I have a test being run, I'm like, oh shit, yeah. So.
I always hit the play button over here to start a session. It's like you already got one running. You want to do another one?
That's why I put that one.
That's not a bad idea.
all right.
Put it right there, huh?
And now I don't have another one. Way to.
That's not a bad idea, because I've played with putting this all different places, but I've never thought about putting it there. I might try that. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mark.
Aren't you glad I stayed awake?
Yes. All right, so let me turn all that stuff off real quick. Control that. Disable Xdebug. I know we're short on time, so if you have questions, shout them out. I think we're almost done here. Oh, Unit Test Explorer. I love this. So this is the unit. This is the PHP. Where is it? Oh, I'm in the wrong place. Get rid of that. Container. This is the Unit Test Explorer extension now. That provides the little flask down there. And if you leave that blank up there, it's going to show you all tests in your code base. Core, contrib, custom. So what I normally do is if I'm working on a custom module, and actually serial is the worst name for a module to test this with because it.
Yeah.
So that's why I had admin toolbar before admin toolbar. So this shows us all of the admin toolbar tests that are available. And granted, this does require, like what I haven't shown you today is you need a valid PHPCS configuration file in your project root. You need a valid PHPUnit.xml file in your project root. If you're interested in doing the gory details of any of that, I am the full day workshop that Ari so glowingly talked about this morning. I'm doing that on Friday. So if anyone wants the gory details about all this, that's what Friday's all about. Yeah, but now I don't have to open up the command line. If I want to run this functional test, I just boom, hit that button and it runs. So, and give the little green check that it passed, or if they fail. So again, for me it's a time saver because my native tongue is not command line. I'm more UI based. So I do like these tools that are, easily accessible. All right. If you're not using settings.local.php, shame, and you should be using it on your local. Don't commit it. And again, this has nothing to do with VS Code. This is just a pet peeve of mine. So I'm trying to, one class at a time, one group of people at a time. This will force all errors to the screen on your local. You will never get a white screen of death on your local, and it will turn off selected Drupal caches, which generally, unless you're testing caching or writing something involving caching, you want them turned off on your local anyway. It does some other stuff as well, but use settings on .local.php. Yeah, so other extensions, I mentioned the first two. This is that Drupal.org documentation page I mentioned. It still mentions this empty indent extension. I really need to go and edit this page. I don't know if you need this. If you configure VS Code using the configuration I gave you, VS Code will do that for you. So it's one less extension you need. Every time I present this, I do mention the Composer extension. I have every intention of trying it out. And I guarantee you by like 2 p.m. today, I will have forgotten all about it again. So if someone can remind me at some point, I will try it out. Does anybody use any other VS Code extensions that you love, Yeah, that's every time I ask it, I expect someone to have something that I never heard of, but it's like this a lot of times. So, all right, that's cool. Yeah, I don't know why I had that then. And then these slides. So this is, if you want these slides with all the links and all that configuration and the list of extensions, there you go. That's the last slide. So normally I'm like 10 minutes over on this session. Today I'm 5 minutes early, so any questions? I will say everything I've shown you, you can do with Lando or DDEV, and you can configure PHP Storm with Lando or DDEV to do similar. I will say the trickiest combination is Lando and PHP Storm. But you can get it all working, and with a full day on Friday, we probably will, depending on who's in the room. So, yeah.
Is your primary use case for this set of developing modules? And if it is, then you usually have a local Git repository
Yeah.
in the mix?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is all independent of Git. This is not going to get in the way of Git or vice versa. I use this for contribution. I use this for clients. I use this for teaching. This is kind of my go-to. Earlier this year, before, let's say, this calendar year, I kind of had I used to show a lot of this stuff installing Drupal Coder kind of globally on your host operating system. And then you can kind of configure everything so it still ran. But that had a few more steps. And you weren't guaranteed to be using the same version of PHP on your host operating system as you are in your container. So that was like a weakness of it. And so earlier this year, I kind of said, you know what? I don't use it that way myself ever. So, I did in the past, but with, especially the performance of DDEV these days is so good that you can do everything with a container, and it's almost like being native. I mean, it's so close. And my machine is it's an M1 Mac. I use Rancher Desktop instead of Docker for Mac. DDEV ships with mutagen enabled. which it just makes Docker fast. So, anybody else?
I was just going to say I use Remote Explorer a lot to like SSH tunnel into servers,
Yeah.
and it is basically using VS Code as if I'm on my regular Mac, so I never have to worry about that.
Right.
You know, and then your terminal loads your
Yeah.
whatever you've got your setup as.
So tell us more about. So you are connecting directly to production servers and making changes there.
Yes. So like I'll SSH in and
So
I
it's
mean,
that
it's really dumb
baseball
stuff.
hat, the cowboy hat.
Yeah, exactly. But I can, so I do. Okay, this is smart.
Yeah. No, I mean in a Paint you can absolutely do that. Yeah.
Does Rancher Desktop require a subscription or anything like that?
Rancher right now is open source. I've heard that it might go kind of similar to what Docker for Mac did, where it's free for certain use cases, but then there's a paid version.
I use DDEV with Kalima, and it's perfect.
Yes, right. So I used Kalima for a long time as well. I ran into an issue updating Kalima once, where I updated Kalima and then DDEV stopped working.
Oh, really?
And I had to, I worked with Randy, who's a maintainer of DDEV, and we found out, okay, well that update of Kalima changes configuration, so you had to get in there and it was at that point, I said, okay, well, I don't want to say like at that point Kalima sucked, but I'm like, that shouldn't have happened. There should have been something in the README for the update saying, hey, watch out for this configuration change. So when Randy, or the DDEV folks came out with an announcement saying we are officially supporting Rancher Desktop and Orb Stack in addition to Kalima and Docker for Mac. I said I want to move away from Kalima just because it's open source. Maybe I'll go back someday, but it is. The performance of Rancher is actually a little bit faster than Kalima.
Oh, really?
Just a little bit. Depending, I don't know. I probably wouldn't notice if someone swapped it in the middle of the night on me. I can tell you, they're both a lot faster than Docker for Mac. That's for sure. Anybody else? All right. Thank you.